Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call. My plan when I woke up this morning was to have a full call and Q&A. I received a call that there was going to be a conference call in Europe. They always do this Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time, our time. So that call is going to be beginning in a minute or two, and I really want to get into that call. That call has to do specifically with the situation in the Ukraine. I'm still not convinced that whatever happens in Ukraine is going to have an effect on the reinstitution and revaluation of the Iraqi Dinar and some of these other currencies, but obviously it's a possibility, so I want to get in on that call. I do want to talk just briefly a little bit about what's going on with the Ukraine. It's no secret that Putin, and he's discussed this both verbally and in articles that he's written, that he views the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of last century, as a great tragedy. And his objective is to reconstitute the old Soviet Union and reestablish the relationships he had with some of the buffer states in Eastern Europe. He accomplished his objective during the Obama administration with the Crimea, and now he's attempting to do the same thing with the Ukraine. He wants the Ukraine and a lot of the Eastern European nations to be out of the orb of the West and particularly never become a member of NATO. This is unfortunate in that Europe's intransigence is going to be their own problem because the Ukraine is rich in rare earth minerals, which the modern technologies require. And many people don't know this, but Ukraine is actually a large country. It's equivalent to the size of Western Europe, and it's the third or fourth leading producer in the world of grain, which means that it serves really as one of the major breadbaskets of Europe. So Europe's intransigence on this issue is just going to come back and bite them. And they're getting precious little help from Biden. Putin's running circles around Biden. And no matter what metric you measure Biden by, whether it's domestic policy, the border, inflation, the economy, trade deals, the situation in Afghanistan, and now with the Ukraine, the man's been an absolute train wreck. I'm hard-pressed to think of any president that's done so much damage in 1 year, particularly his first year when he's supposed to be in that honeymoon period where everyone, at least outwardly, is trying to be cooperative. But he has decisions to make, and many of them are just A or B, and whichever decision he makes always seems to be the wrong one. So I don't know whether it's stupidity or malice. I don't know, what to think, but only that whatever decision he makes, at this point, we have to pretty much assume it's the wrong decision. But that being the case, let's talk about what's most important, which is where we are right now in Iraq with regard to the reinstitution and revaluation of their currency. By the way, before I get into that, I would strongly suggest our newer callers go to our call of February 9th and February 16th. There's a lot of information there about us, and there's also a detailed discussion about the program we've put in place to assist you, and there may be a Q&A on one of those calls as well. With regard to the situation in Iraq, things are moving along a little slower than we would like, but this is Iraq. They have formed their government, but they have not yet formally seated everyone. Their budget has not been passed. It's near passage, however, but the great benefit is, unlike previous years where they were fighting over precious little resources because the budget was running at the substantial deficits, now it looks like they've got huge surpluses to work with. So this is very important. It means that they can pay off their international loans. They made final restitution to Kuwait. They've begun to neutralize the Iranian influence, which is very important. Iran for years has viewed Iraq to be their piggy bank, which is why Iran does not want to see the resurrection of Iraq as a fully sovereign nation, but they're not going to be able to stop that. Now, the usual suspects have made arguments about why the dinar should either not revalue now or not revalue ever. One of the arguments, and we've discussed this, is the money supply argument. And my response to that has been that certainly most of the provisional 3-0 currency has been collected. Once the currency reinstitutes in country, the remaining 3-0 currency in country, the 3 zeros will not be recognized. So a $25,000 note becomes a 25 dinar note. A 10,000 dinar note becomes a 10 dinar note. So that substantially reduces the money supply. For those of us who are international investors and do hold the Iraqi provisional 3-0 currency, that currency will be exchanged for our national currencies, which does not affect the money supply of Iraq. And that currency will then be submitted to Iraq, or it will be destroyed and then digitally transferred to Iraq. So it will not enter the money supply of Iraq. So I don't see the money supply issue being legitimate given those facts. The other issue is the diversification of revenue, because upwards of 85% of the revenue that Iraq currently generates is coming from the sale of petroleum. But that diversification is in the works, and it would be my argument that not reinstituting their currency will hurt the diversification. Now, there are a lot of areas that they need to diversify in the areas of agriculture, industry, and tourism. Now, with regard to agriculture, as we know, Iraq sits in the Tigris-Euphrates River Delta, which means that for thousands of years that silt has flown down into that delta, meaning it's extremely rich soil and good for agricultural purposes. In terms of industry, we know that that silt that's come down into the Tigris-Euphrates Delta has put a lot of precious metals and industrial metals in that area as well. And because, again, this is flat, fertile soil, it's also much more easily mined. That could increase their diversity as well. The reinstitution of their currency could jumpstart a lot of the trade, and that will create additional revenues with taxes and imports, things of that nature. Tourism will also become, in my opinion, one of their major sources of revenue. We're talking about the ancient Sumerian culture, Hammurabi, the creation of the first complex civil and criminal codes going back as far as 3,000 years. So that would also diversify as well. Now, we know that the most important thing that's happened is that the final tranche of restitution payments to Kuwait means that Iraq is coming out of the IMF section, Chapter 7. This is very important because now Iraq has settled all of their issues with the World Court. They're fully a sovereign nation. What that means is they can now issue government bonds. So international investors will want to invest in Iraq as a new sovereign nation that's been released from Chapter 7, and that's additional revenue coming into the country as well. So for all of these reasons, I'm hopeful that the individuals who, for their own selfish and political reasons, are trying to postpone, if not stop, this reinstitution of the dinar will be unsuccessful in their attempts. Now, if the reinstitution were to happen now that we're entering March, we're entering the last month of a given quarter. And I've discussed with you the difficulties that this can present. But there are two issues that we're going to need to be looking at with the reinstitution and revaluation of this currency. First, the liquidity issue. The liquidity issue will be the direct result of the central banks moving as quickly as possible and probably trying to move ahead of the calculation of these rates as these global currencies move from fiat-based to Basel III compliant rates. These countries are going to want to digitize their currency. That includes the United States as well. Now, there are inherent problems with the digital currency and the elimination of hard currency. First, it means that any individual that has been saving and holding that hard paper currency is going to have to turn it in. It also means the loss of liquidity, because if the currency is digitized, it means it's in the possession of the bank and the banks and the central banks. It's not in your possession. You can't take a digital currency home. You can only take a hard currency home with you. The second thing is the loss of privacy. All right. Once they digitize this thing, you're on the grid. So your privacy, for all intents and purposes, is gone. We know now that the number 2 loss of wealth in the aggregate is through identity theft. So with a digital currency, despite the fact that the government says this is a safety feature, of course, it's just the reverse. You're at risk for cyber attacks. It's much more governments to institute civil forfeitures, as is going on right now in Canada with these peaceful protests. And countries that really want to do harm can erase digital currency possession with the EMT, electromagnetic pulse weapons. So the only solution to circumvent the digital currency is to have a smaller percentage of your total holdings and portfolio in currencies and financial assets. You'd be better off transitioning as much as practicable to tangible assets, like gold, silver, platinum, REITs, real estate investment trust, and then direct investment into real estate. That way, it's out of the hands of the central bank, and you have at least some control of it. Then the other issue is the taxation issue. Now, pursuant to Section 988 E2 of the Internal Revenue Code, the exchange, the profit from this exchange would be taxed outside of the trust as cap gain, although the cap gain rates have gone up. If the exchange is done within an irrevocable trust such as ours, the gains would be tax deferred. Now, because of the magnitude of these exchanges, we want the IRS and the Treasury Department to confirm these sections with us in writing. However, they say they have declined to respond until the event, which is the reinstitution in country. But here's our problem. Let's assume a reinstitution happens in March, and to make it even worse, late in the month. Well, that means to the extent that any taxes would be due, they would be due on April 15th, just literally a few weeks away. That means we would probably not be able to get the IRS to confirm what the tax status would be. And as much as I hate to acknowledge this, what this would probably mean is that we'd have to assume the worst scenario in order to avoid 100% penalty tax, pay the ordinary income, and then file for a refund citing Sections 980-82 and Section 643B of the Code. We don't want to have to do that, but that might be the case with a reinstitution in March. So we have to be vigilant about this because we may have to move very quickly if this were to reinstitute in the month of March. Of course, once we get to the Ides of March, beware the Ides of March, that's March 15th, then under no circumstances would I want to see a reinstitution until April or at least in the next quarter. Now, ordinarily, we discuss why individuals need to establish irrevocable trusts and why they need to be established pre-RV if you're holding these currencies. But the establishment of these trusts go far beyond those of us that are holding these currencies, especially if they go to a digital currency, because with the establishment of a trust, your wealth would be within the trust, so that would not be transacted with your Social Security number, but would in fact be transacted with your separate EIN number. And so constitutionally, the government would be prohibited from freezing your assets or confiscating them through civil forfeiture without going to a court. Because, again, the money would be in these trusts, and these trusts are protected under the law. So beyond possession of the currencies, the direction that these governments are going would require that we use whatever legal methods and entities available to preserve our privacy and to preserve our constitutional rights, particularly our rights under the Fourth Amendment. So this is what's important about the trusts, and this is why I strongly suggest you go to our calls of February 9th and February 16th to learn a lot more of the details involved with establishing these trusts. Now, that's basically what I wanted to provide for today. Again, the reinstitution could happen at any time. Iraq has done everything asked of it. Iraq has done everything it needs to do. The only remaining thing that some of the people in country in Iraq are saying now is that they need to put together a blue ribbon panel to discuss the implications of reinstituting their currency, which is an absolute absurdity. We've been going through this for 18 years. We've had Dr. Shabibi that went through it in detail. It's been discussed over and over again ad nauseum. There is no valid reason for postponing the reinstitution. It's just that when the currency is reinstituted, the nefarious characters that have taken advantage of the status quo will have lost that leverage. And that's the only reason the reinstitution. It's not got anything legitimately to do with the money supply. It's not got anything to do with the diversification of revenue. It's got nothing to do with any blue ribbon panel that needs to investigate the implications of going back to what they say themselves are the glory years, to have their currency revalued at what it should be worth based on their known natural resources. So let's hope that this happens as soon as possible, and so that we can all move down the road. It would be wonderful if this could happen before they move to a digital currency. I don't see how they can get a digital currency up and running, certainly in the next 90 days here in this country. But we've got some people in charge right now that, in my opinion, just don't know what they're doing and don't really care about the American people. I don't think they're really interested in 8 to 10 million new millionaires in the United States pursuant to this revaluation who are not going to vote for a larger government and higher taxes. But, we are where we are. We're going to watch this on a daily basis. We'll be back next week, of course. But certainly if something of a dramatic nature were to happen between now and next Wednesday, we'll try to get out an emergency email and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we will be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Again, for our newer callers, you can go to our website, which is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc@gmail.com. And our phone service is 307-274-4122. I strongly suggest you contact us to get our no-obligation initial package. It does contain everything you need should you decide to establish a trust prior to the reinstitution and revaluation of these currencies, but you're under no obligation to do so. The package contains a lot of information about us, about the currencies, about the revaluation in these trust vehicles. You can review that information. Contact us if you have any questions. There will be no consultation fee. So again, thanks for listening. We'll be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great week.